Hey, what's up, Fight Freaks? It's the Combat Remix. Bringing today's MMA fix to die-hard fans, but we also accept those who may think that Patty Pimblett is an Irish burger. Today's video kicks off a new series where we go over every bad bonus award in the UFC. So let's get to it. Many of these entries won't be particularly egregious, but there are going to see some that are more egregious than others. While many other ones we cover aren't really obvious for the bonus award choices, and at the very best can be labeled questionable. So in chronological order, our first entry goes to UFC 62 for the bonus award of Knockout of the Night, which was awarded to Chuck Liddell for his stoppage win over Renato Babalu Sobral. I know it sounds a bit crazy to question the legitimacy of Chuck Liddell winning a Knockout of the Night bonus award. After all, we are talking about one of the greatest knockout artists in UFC history, and if this fight was on any other UFC card, it could easily deserve to win. But in all fairness, I feel like the UFC just kind of gave it to the main eventing superstar and really overlooked Cheick Kongo's knockout. And to be fair, I almost did as well. It wasn't until I compared these two fights that I realized my memory of how the Liddell fight played out wasn't exactly as I thought. But who can deny Chuck Liddell landing a beautiful knockout uppercut on Sobral, retaining his championship belt? Except that's not what happened. So credit to Sobral, he actually made it back to his feet and started throwing strikes in the following exchange. But unfortunately, this wasn't going to be a crazy comeback win for Sobral, as he did get overwhelmed in the following exchange and slump back down to the mat. It would actually take an additional 20 seconds for Liddell to get past Sobral's defenses and land enough ground and pound for the ref to step in and stop the fight. And to be fair, when we juxtapose this with the Cheick Kongo fight, there are a lot of similarities. Cheick Kongo clearly started getting the upper hand, hurt his opponent badly several times, and even had Christian Wellisch on the ground pretty much in survival mode. However, I would argue that the biggest difference is, when the fight did make its way to the feet, Cheick Kongo only needed one perfectly placed knee to the head of Christian Wellisch that sent him dropping to the canvas. And at least in my opinion, this should have won him the Knockout of the Night award. Next on the list brings us to UFC 64 regarding the Submission of the Night award, which was awarded to Clay Guida for his rear naked choke submission over Justin James. Which certainly isn't a bad submission. After all, I am a Clay Guida fan, but if I'm being objective, I couldn't quite say why this one was picked over Kurt Pellegrino's rear naked choke submission over Junior Sunsao. We have two rear naked choke submissions, and although I would agree that the overall ending sequence to the fight for Clay Guida was a little more exciting, it was primarily set up with nothing but ground and pound and heavy strikes. But Justin James was pretty much overwhelmed on the ground due to Clay Guida's ground and pound, and he turtled up. He just gave up his back. Clay Guida did the right thing, jumped on his back, and sunk in the choke. And when we juxtapose this with Kurt Pellegrino's submission, it was much more of a technical setup. Junior Sunsao was actually defending rather well. They were on the ground for quite a bit in a ground battle. Right before the end of the fight, it looked like Sunsao was either looking to perhaps shrimp out or retain guard, and that's when Kurt Pellegrino had a beautiful counter, got his back, and sunk in the choke. So between these two fights, I still think Kurt Pellegrino should have been awarded with the Submission of the Night award. Next entry on our list brings us to UFC 82 for the Fight of the Night award, which was awarded to the main event between Anderson Silva and Dan Henderson. While I certainly don't think this was a bad fight, I've personally always found it to be highly overrated. And on that same main card, you had not one but two excellent fights, those being Josh Koscheck versus Dustin Hazlett and Chris Lieben versus Alessio Sakara, two amazing fights. I honestly don't know which one of these two fights would have deserved to win more, but the fact that neither one was picked and just given to the main event really blows my mind. And I'm honestly not saying the main event was a bad fight. I mean, the first round was a little bit boring, but we were just so mesmerized about the fact that what was seen to be as the untouchable Anderson Silva was controlled for an entire round on the ground. Second round was obviously more exciting, and the end of the fight was pretty good. But if we're all being honest, we should just admit that if that exact fight played out between two other random fighters on the prelims, not one person would be arguing that it should have won the Fight of the Night, especially over the two aforementioned fights. But we're not done with UFC 82 yet. We also have to mention the Knockout of the Night award, which was in fact awarded to Chris Lieben for his finish over Alessio Sakara. And while we just got done saying how I certainly think this was worthy of a Fight of the Night honors, I can't say the same for Knockout of the Night, and I'm surprised they didn't either go with Josh Koscheck's knockout over Dustin Hazlett or Yushin Okami's knockout of Evan Tanner. While the overall fight between Yushin Okami and Evan Tanner may have not been the most exciting, you certainly can't say that about the finish. While in the clinch, Okami landed a beautiful knee that immediately dropped Evan Tanner. He was out cold. And in addition to being one of the greatest fights that night, Josh Koscheck ended the fight with Dustin Hazlett with a head kick and then followed it up with a few extra punches on the ground before the ref called off the fight. But going back to Chris Lieben versus Alessio Sakara, many people forget that the stoppage was somewhat controversial. There was even some discussion amongst the commentators over whether or not this may have been an early stoppage.
I could see an argument for being stopped there.
And Alessio says why.
As soon as the fight was called off, Alessio Sakara was protesting the stoppage. In fact, out of all the finishes that night, this is the only one that had any controversy whatsoever, so I'm a little bit surprised just on that alone that this was ultimately awarded the knockout of the night. Especially on a fight card where you had two other great choices to choose from. Our last entry brings us to UFC 83 regarding the knockout of the night bonus award. This was awarded to Jason McDonald for his finish over Joe Dirksen. And like the previous entries, this in and of itself wasn't a bad finish. On any other fight card, it very well could have deserved to win the bonus award. But on a bout such as this, where you have 7 TKO or knockout finishes, I don't know why this particular one was chosen. The obvious choice should have gone to Jonathan Goulet for his finish over Kiniyoshi Hironaka. Now, that particular bout did end up winning the bonus award for Fight of the Night, so I can only suspect that maybe that's why they didn't give Jonathan Goulet the Knockout of the Night award, even though we have seen fights in the past win more than one bonus award, but maybe the UFC just wasn't feeling it that night. And sure, maybe I'm being a little overcritical awarding a Knockout of the Night award to a fight that was stopped via ground and pound. And sure, maybe it deserves it a little more than Michael Bisping's win over Charles McCarthy because technically that fight was stopped in between rounds. And sure, maybe you could say that the ref saved Alan Belcher from Jason Day getting a huge highlight knockout win. And I'm certainly not giving the award to GSP for his knees to the body finish over Matt Serra. But at least Rich Franklin and Cain Velasquez both dropped their opponents before finishing them on the ground. So while I certainly don't want to say that Jason McDonald wasn't even in the mix of all the knockouts that night, I still can find a much better argument for 3, possibly even 4 other finishes. Well, there you have it, Fight Freaks. Those are the entries for this video. We will continue to go in chronological order when we continue the series. I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments, as well as any suggestions you may have, including for super fights or celebrity fighter lookalikes. Remix is signing out for now, but we'll return to bring his Fight Freaks their MMA fix.